I'm so happy to be here this morning and kick off the day with all of you. Thanks for being here. My name is Caitlin Reff. I'm the Major Projects and Transit Division Manager at the City of Portland Bureau of Transportation, known as PBOT. I've also had the pleasure of serving on the Mpact National Steering Committee for several years, and this last year, the Local Host Committee. And I get to be your MC this morning. This morning, you're going to get to hear from one of our region's top leaders and two incredible keynote speakers. And first, we couldn't do any of this without the help of our sponsors, so please join me in welcoming to the stage Andrew Brennan from HNTB.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to Portland. My name is Andrew Brennan, and I am Vice President in HNTB's National Transit and Rail Practice. I'm here with a number of my colleagues from HNTB today, and we're just really thrilled to be here. First of all, I just want to reiterate what Caitlin said and really thank Cammie and the work of the staff. You've done an incredible conference and appreciate all the hard work. And Caitlin, you and your team as a host committee have been really fantastic, and thanks for being so welcoming and everything. So we're thrilled here to be in Portland today to really talk about the interplay of transit, mobility, land use, and development that better connects and enhances our communities. We are particularly excited to be part of this 30th anniversary of this important conference and want to thank and congratulate those of you who are here today who were part of the Railvolution and Mpact's founding. We all depend on the promise of mobility to connect us to things that matter most in our lives. At HNTB, we're committed to making connections possible and creating positive, lasting connections so everyone rises. We are keenly aware of the changing landscape of transit investments and transit priorities that is occurring nationwide, and are thankful to be part of an organization that is so committed to making sure that smart investments continue to be made for all of our citizens. We're proud to work alongside our clients to help them shape the future of mobility. From addressing transportation system needs that improve public safety and quality of life, to planning and designing projects that minimize environmental impacts, to developing and hardening systems that can withstand the impact of climate change or other stressors. We strive to improve the communities in which we operate. And lastly, I hope all of you can take advantage of the opportunity over the next few days to make new connections or to deepen existing relationships, and then take back those ideas, those collaborations and opportunities and inspirations that you've gained here to your organizations and make your communities even stronger. And so with that, I would like to introduce Lynn Peterson, who is the president of the Metro Council here in Portland. Thank you very much. I'm looking over here.
Good morning, everyone. You're awake. I hope you had fun last night in our city. I just wanted to welcome you to Portland and to Oregon and tell you a few quick stories as you sit in this wonderful place. I actually came to Portland from Madison, Wisconsin. Any Wisconsinites in the audience? Okay. In 1993. For those of you from the area, the reason I left is I had been working for Wisconsin Department of Transportation, and my Aldo Leopold conservation ethic suddenly bumped up against my career choice when the governor of The governor of the state hired a new Department of Transportation director who decided that we would whole cloth needed a whole new project to connect Madison to the Wisconsin Dells Highway 12. It became a very controversial project, and I was asked to work on it, and I said I couldn't. And so I started asking questions and ended up in Portland, not knowing it was the planning mecca of the United States at the time, getting my master's of urban and regional planning. In 1995, 30 years ago, I was 27, and I snuck into the first Railvolution. I did not have a ticket. I will admit it. I snuck into the very convention center that I now oversee. I went because I was born in Milwaukee, and the keynote speaker was the mayor of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, John Norquist. He gave a great talk about how we were building subdivisions that were called Orchard Hills, and there was no orchard and there was no hill. Babbling brooks, and there was no babbling brook. What he was really trying to say is that you need to start building communities that are worth a picture postcard. And as I look at this banner in back of us, these are the things that we're proud of. These are the things that an artist took away, right? These are the things that we've worked on for 20, 30, 40 years that make us proud to be Oregonians and proud to be part of this community. So I think part of what I learned at that first one was visioning. It made me realize that there were others also who cared about the same thing I did. I did not realize that there were other engineers who also cared about place. I am a recovering engineer. 2 years later, I was able to attend the third Railvolution in St. Louis. Anybody from St. Louis? Thank you for coming. It was a life-changing experience for me because at that conference, Walter Kulash from Florida spoke, and he spoke on Highway 12, the very project I had left Wisconsin about. And in his presentation, it was the first time I had ever heard anyone challenge the assumptions behind road building, that you don't have to design for 70 miles an hour on every single street. You don't have to assume that you need a 16-foot wide lane. You can challenge these assumptions. That was 1997. That really opened my eyes, and I knew I had found my community at Railvolution. And I have been to most of them since then. The connections I've made through this conference have supported me, and I have supported all of you in many different ways. Through my career working on projects across the United States, programs, and even my career, and as well as writing my book, Roadways for People, that's on Amazon, Island Press, which is really about 30 years of experience of what does it mean to not just build transportation projects, but build transportation projects that build community. There is a huge difference, and that's why we're all here. So as a recovering transportation engineer and an urban planner, an elected official, I have the honor of working on both the visions that we will be hearing next on Reconnecting Rondo and Albina Vision Trust, and you will make those same lasting connections with people who change your life here. And one of those people we actually lost this year. Melvin Giles from Rondo neighborhood. Melvin was known as the Bubble Man. He would carry vials of bubbles around and start blowing them if the tension in the room got too high. He was an early supporter of Reconnecting Rondo. He was a community garden advocate. He was an advocate for the youth in arts, and probably a lot more that I don't even know about. Our former governor of Oregon, Tom McCall, that championed the Oregon Land Use Planning Program, was quoted as saying, "Heroes are not giant statues framed against a red sky. They are people who say, this is my community, and it is my responsibility to make it better." I would ask all of you not just for a moment of silence for Melvin, but I want you to imagine being in a meeting that you just had that was extremely tension-filled. And imagine Melvin, an almost 70-year-old man with a gray beard and purple highlights in his dreadlocks and purple tie-dye on, handing out those vials of bubbles and blowing them to bring down the tension. Reminding us that we are all human. We all have feelings, and feelings we can control if we spend more time listening, curious about others and how they perceive life, how they need to feel heard, and how we can work together to reconnect, envision, and build out those ideas that we provided space to be at the table. 30 years later of Railvolution and a lot of listening over my career, my lesson is that what worked in the past is probably not exactly what we need for the future. When the status quo is not working, question the status quo, and since that is hard, it is hard to question the status quo, but it's worth it, but it's necessary to do. But bring your bubbles and remind everyone there in the room that they can be their own heroes if we see each other as human, like Melvin did. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Metro Council President Peterson. It is an absolute privilege to introduce our next speakers. This morning, we're going to be hearing from leaders at the forefront of restorative justice, rebuilding and redefining community development and ownership. We're going to hear about how transportation investments have shaped or destroyed communities and how they are being reimagined and rebuilt. Keith Baker is the Executive Director of ReConnect Rondo. ReConnect Rondo, Inc. is an advocacy organization committed to addressing racial disparities in Minnesota. Keith leads the organization's initiative to revitalize the Rondo community with a land bridge that reconnects Rondo and creates Minnesota's first African-American cultural district enterprise. And JT Flowers is the Director of Government Affairs and Communications from the Albina Vision Trust. JT is from Inner Northeast Portland, and his work centers on placemaking, economic development, and generational wealth building for Black and historically displaced Portlanders. As the youngest ever TriMet board member, JT brings his childhood experience of riding the bus and Max light rail to the forefront. JT says transit is inherently a question of equity. I've had the pleasure of working with JT, and I have such respect for him. His perspective and passion for social justice and community building are contagious. We're going to hear from Keith first, and then he's going to pass the mic to JT. And while they will both share stories from their individual perspectives, experiences, and geographies, I know that they have been connected through this work. It's heart-wrenching how freeway building has demolished neighborhoods, resulting in lost homes, businesses, and wealth. It's all the more devastating to know how similar these impacts were in these two cities and across the country. But the synergies of approaches and their resolve and how to rebuild is remarkable. These are precedent-setting initiatives, and they are learning from each other. So we are really in for a treat. Buckle up, get ready, and please join me in welcoming from Minnesota, Keith Baker.
Thank you. Appreciate it, appreciate it. Thank you. Let's see, is the microphone on okay, and do I have a clicker? Beautiful. The question is whether or not I can actually find, that's the red button and the green button, I got it. Before I even get started, what I'd like to do is I'd like everyone to put their hands like so. And what I'd like you to do is all clap at exactly the same time when I count to 3, right? You all should see what I see. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 4. One of the things that I think is really important and I just appreciate you mentioning Bubbles Melvin. He was a rock-hard advocate for community lifting, and he was one of the earlier outreach advocates for the Land Bridge project in Minnesota. So I appreciate you giving honor to Melvin for his work. Recognizing just the exercise that I just gave you, on a couple of occasions we were able to clap at exactly the same time. Exactly the same time. However, sometimes we don't clap at exactly the same time. And I think we're in a really interesting moment right now, because as we think about transportation today, as we think about transportation 21st century, we have an opportunity to clap at exactly the same time. Our project is to create an African American cultural enterprise district. Transportation is a tool. We've got systems, processes, tools, and resources that are functioning all around communities all the time, with communities reacting to what's at play. I want to really highlight the 4 agencies: the Department of Transportation, the corridor connecting Minneapolis to St. Paul, and I-94. How many folks have been to the Twin Cities? So you know exactly where I'm talking about. This is a corridor that then Commissioner Charlie Zelle indicated that he had apologized and we should not cause such harm ever again. But there was also Mayor Coleman that also apologized in 2015 for the participation of the city. So again, urban renewal and transportation leveraging are all happening at the same time. And incidentally, in case you didn't know, Minnesota was the first funded federal highway freeway in the country. When we think about the Department of Transportation, Ramsey County, City of St. Paul, and our MAT planning organization, one of the things that we need to continue to have folks do is clap at the same time. Now, outside of this project, sometimes that doesn't even happen. But the community driving this project is intended to have them all clap at the same time. And it's more than just a structure. This is really about community building. So the community of Rondo had about 3,000 homes before the freeway came through. Only half exist today. Only one half. 700 homes is what we use as our number, 300 businesses destroyed by this freeway system, cutting off the social, cultural, economic, civic fabric and spiritual fabric of a community. Rondo's one community of about 950 communities across the country. If you're interested in reading, the city planning process is a fascinating book. It talks about how the Twin Cities is really one of the best planned cities in the country at this moment in time. But it also tells the story of Rondo and the decision of cutting through this community that had a social, cultural, economic, and civic spiritual fabric. These are the residual impacts. And what you have are 18 indicators that are ranked net negative, from heat island effect to food security, water security, energy. So when I say that we're going to leverage a tool, which is transportation, what outcomes should this tool bring about is really what's key. So we use this as our foundation of what it means to start to build equity. I've been in the Twin Cities 45 years. I've seen no scalable change for African Americans in the 45 years I've been involved in working not only in transportation, but in the nonprofit sector, the philanthropic sector. And I don't mention these as criticisms, but they're observations of reality. And I think that the freeway has been really centerpiece in creating that kind of havoc within communities. So our mission is to revitalize Rondo, to recreate an African American cultural enterprise district connected by a land bridge, which means there's already a remnant that exists within the community of Rondo. But the other thing that is important for us to recognize is how complicated sometimes this is and the importance of having everyone clapping together. It's complicated. Residents, elders, descendants. the nonprofit ecosystem, the jurisdictional relationships that are at play, our state legislature, and then obviously the timing of the alignment of the infrastructure bill. Sounds perfect. That's exactly how we were looking at it ahead of time. But it's important that you understand that ReConnect Rondo and the origins of the organization was a central light rail corridor project coming through University Avenue, having no stops planned in Rondo. So you can imagine, the community didn't just sit and say, that's okay. The community rose up, 2009, actually had to put a lawsuit on the table in order to really get the attention. The good news mitigation came forward, 3 stops were the result, but it was a movement that had begun and began to be triggered by those members that were looking at transit. So why don't you just replace the land that was taken, they said. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're trying to organize ourselves in such a way to bring it forward. So an African American Cultural Enterprise District, what can it have on it? Certainly it has play space, housing, open pavilion, renewable energy considerations, history and culture, a civic commons area. Sounds great. That's our pursuit. Land bridges are not new. We all know that, right? Clyde Warren was one of the very first ones we had visited. I found Clyde Warren just fascinating because it was run and governed in terms of the maintenance and operations on top by a private foundation. A financing mechanism. I said, wow, that's just incredible for DOT to build the structure and have another organization responsible for programming and fund development on top. But I also visited Seattle, and I did meet a couple of folks from Seattle here, Mercer Island, and I thought to myself, boy, that's really passive use of space. It's a great amenity, but it's connecting wealthy communities. Very passive. And in my mind, leveraging transportation has to be much larger than that. So what did this organization in 2017 that was launched do? It did its homework. A couple of studies in particular I'll kind of run through just really briefly, but anti-displacement community investment. Looking at a 4P financing model, thinking through what Clyde Warren did. Really looked at establishing a feasibility study so that we could speak to the various jurisdictions and it makes some sense to them. For those that don't know, I spent 18 years with the Department of Transportation. I managed the consultant contracts unit. I worked with all the functional areas. And what did we do? We jumped out ahead of MnDOT's planning process. MnDOT announces the apology 2015. I come on providing the leadership in 2019, but had been involved prior to that, 2015, behind the scenes after I left DOT. So if you can imagine a community leading a restorative development opportunity. And that restorative development opportunity, really in today's numbers, $313 million for the structure. Those of us in transportation know, that's not a lot. But it presents an opportunity for development on top. And who controls the development on top is really the question. It should be the community, those that were most impacted. The potential, 576 housing units. Now some people say, oh, you're going to put housing on top of a land bridge? Absolutely, although we'd have more analysis to do. Open market space, about 110,000 square feet. Really looking at how we can move forward with having institutions like a library. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of passive use of amenities. We're creating brand new land in the city of St. Paul. It's landlocked. The county's landlocked, right? And so where's new land going to emerge, and how do we begin to reconnect and rebuild communities around that? Anti-displacement community investment, I'll go over it just really briefly. A toolkit that allows us to have all of the mechanisms that are necessary, because this is not what happened on the Central Light Rail Corridor. Today, the Central Light Rail Corridor is virtually unaffordable for people. So how do we get ahead and put something in place and begin to plan for that? The ability of people to return and the ability of people to stay. becomes very, very critical. And we have a number of partners that work hard. The Rondo Community Land Trust, I think, was in an earlier session. Really a powerful opportunity. A community investment trust, a community reinvestment fund. And why is that necessary? It's necessary to make sure that the community controls the decision-making in its process. You know, we think about the Sports Facilities Authority in Minnesota. We think about the Target or the Twin Stadium. And we think about these 3P models for private sector. But we don't think about a 4P model for the community: public, private, philanthropic, and people. Why shouldn't people be able to invest in their own community? Why should they not be able to drive their own community in terms of the outcomes that are necessary? Based on the 18 indicators, it seems to me the community has some answers to this because they're experiencing it really profoundly. $350 million went to the Ballpark Authority. $350 million went to the Sports Facilities Authority, US Bank Stadium, the Twin Stadium, right? Well, how much did I say ours was going to cost? $313 million? Seems doable to me. Which presents also the opportunity to do development on top and to control that development on top. A Rondo Restorative Development Authority. Will that work in a neighborhood or a community if the community has 51% of the voting power on this structure? So we've created a bill. It's going through the legislature here shortly during this legislative session to create such a mechanism and tool, like a port authority, and have the community be the developer. Now, while land trusts are one model, community cooperatives are another model, we want to test a wide range of things here. But everything we do off of the land bridge today is intended to create the model of what can go on top of the land bridge as we think out into the future. Creating wealth. Social, cultural, economic, civic, spiritual fabric was destroyed within a community. And so the big question is, how do you restore a community? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? How do the jurisdictions need to align themselves? Or the community needs to bring them to the table together so that they can clap together. And community members have that kind of influence if they're singing from the same songbook. Creating value, distributing that value back into community. So instead of private development happening and it cycles away and outside of the community, what we're doing is creating an infrastructure that allows resources to cycle back into the community to address those 18 indicators that I had shared with you earlier over time. So restorative development becomes critical. Net zero, everybody knows what that is. Well, the community of Rondo is net negative. So now we have our indicators, and if we think about how we're approaching the work on this blank canvas, we have an opportunity to put some things in place in advance of anything that gets built, and then begin to build around that within the community itself. That's a pretty powerful opportunity. Would you agree? Oh, would you agree? Yes. Amen, Brian. So the whole idea is to get things heading in the right direction, at least to get to net zero. A restorative pathway. Foundational and inclusive economy. A smart city. Integrated utility system that can create jobs, right? That can build economic opportunity. Because we see a blank canvas. I know some folks in DOT, I'm sure they see something different. But we see a blank canvas. And it's an opportunity to build the kind of environment to let this be a catalytic 21 acres of new land that also has enough, I often say, like being from Minnesota, you know, it gets kind of cold and you want to know how far the radiator kind of warms up or heats up, right? We want as much heat as possible so we can cycle that heat farther throughout the community. We see this as a regional opportunity, not just a neighborhood opportunity, in terms of really being able to help support folks moving forward. This is the district scorecard. So not only did we do the human scorecard, but how are we functioning? How are we managing and governing? How are we looking at waste? How are we looking at energy? How are we looking at water? So it's a pretty big proposition, a big idea, but one that we're really excited about. Negative externalities. We're spending a lot of money on responding to a lot of challenges within community. Projected dollars around Medicare, projected dollars in terms of the cost of public safety, the cost of dollars associated with not meeting certain health preventable opportunities. So we're looking at this very comprehensively. Now, how many times have you heard me mention a land bridge? Mostly focused in on as a tool, but the real opportunity ahead of us is how do we, again, address the indicators. Together, what's important is that we all understand what we mean by restorative development. Restorative development is a systems-based approach to development that is inclusive and where environmental, social, and economic performance and benefits are interconnected. Equity is the building of resilience and sustainability within the ecosystem itself to respond. As I mentioned earlier, residents, descendants, nonprofit ecosystem, jurisdictions, legislature, federal government. All of these resources are working constantly, but are we really allowing one another to clap at exactly the same time? It's my hope the answer is yes. We are just completing our neighborhood area plan. Normally the city does the neighborhood area plan. So not only are we tied into this idea of a structure, but we're also taking a look at how community can drive a neighborhood area plan. And that neighborhood area plan focuses in on these 6 elements: transportation, parks and open space, economic development, housing, environmental resilience, and history and culture. The historic footprint of Rondo is 1,700 acres. The land bridge is maybe 5-6 blocks, right? But what's important is for us to look at the entire context of the area and make sure that the historic footprint also reflects those things that we're putting forward on the land bridge itself. But it takes a bit of an effort to do that. I love this picture. It says it all. On average, 150, 125 folks come. For the last 3 or 4 years, this has been going on. Community is committed. Does everybody agree? No. But everyone is learning, and they're going through a process of that learning, which we think is very powerful. Existing conditions, vision and goals, community characteristics, concepts to move forward with, to address those indicators that I had mentioned much earlier than this. I just want to bask on this. We're a community-led effort, not a jurisdictional-led effort. And this is part of what the Reconnecting Communities resources did, was to support our ability to kind of expedite this process. And we were fortunate enough just recently to receive our 2nd Reconnecting Communities grant after review. Thank you. Even though this is for an African American Cultural Enterprise District. Systems framework in those key elements resulted in a direction for us to set standards, policies, and improvements and really figure out where those partnerships are. Tied into this, just as an illustration of the systems framework, how many folks are planners here? Okay. We got transit considerations, we got bikeability, walkability, all those things that are really important, right? But by themselves, this neighborhood area plan can't actualize itself unless everybody's clapping at exactly the same time. This is an example of land use. So again, this community-driven process really allows the community to provide all the input. I always say to the technical team, you're just a box of crayons. The community's telling you what to draw, you're a box of crayons, right? You have to translate it in a wide range of ways, but you're just an asset and a tool. And sometimes when we think about community, what we find ourselves really focused in on is that the community doesn't know transportation. The community doesn't know transit. Well, they experience it. What do you mean they don't know it? Of course they do. I want to translate now the restorative development work to the comp plan in the Twin Cities, the comp plan. So I use this slide just to illustrate for folks that it's important for us to understand that there are policies and strategies already on the books. How do we become the actualizers of those policies? I had mentioned earlier we have a blank canvas. How do we build in order to ensure that we're actualizing those things that everyone is aspiring for in those key elements? So we've established city standards. Now, the city of St. Paul hasn't adopted these standards yet. We're just now bringing forward our neighborhood area plan. We're excited about what's going on here. But we also have to educate the system. Met Council, Ramsey County, Department of Transportation, and the city. And sometimes people say, well, whose project is this anyway? If the jurisdictions aren't leading it, who does it belong to? Well, there's no land, so there's really no debate, except for the fact that MnDOT's responsible for the corridor. This is MnDOT's livability framework. We didn't write it necessarily, although there was a lot of community input in it. So when we take a look at restorative city standards, we take a look at MnDOT's livability framework, we think about all of the policies in the comp plan, we think about Ramsey County's economic competitiveness plan, we talk about climate change goals, both at the city level, the county level, as well as the state. You see us pulling the drawstring on all of these things to get to those indicators. And so I'm just really excited about the work that our community is doing. But it does change how you view community. And that it's through this process we've gone through over the last 10 years that we were able to kind of move us this far, and we're really thrilled about where we are at this particular moment in time. And really the thanks goes to people like Bubbles, right? The elders, right? And just in closing, I'll say this. Marvin Anderson, Deb Montgomery, Nick Kalik, Katie Watts. You all are saying, well, who the heck are these folks? This is the legacy of the community. And while I really did point into some of the technical side of things, this is really about people who lost. And so it's an opportunity for us to restore and revive a community in a very, very unique way. And so I just am so thankful for the opportunity to share a bit of Rondo's story. And I do want to pivot and introduce, I think, really one of the amazing resources here in Portland. I had a chance to come back and visit with the Albina Vision Trust and spend some time with JT and others from Albina. I tell you what an enjoyable visit, but they've got a large project on their hands, and I'm inspired by their large, big thinking. Incrementalism doesn't get us forward, and they certainly are putting forward a project that is not about incrementalism. So I want to introduce JT Flowers to the stage.
One more time for Keith Baker. And a protracted applause is appropriate. You know, as I've dipped my toes further and further into the water of this field that we call restorative redevelopment, there have been few models as wise, as profoundly competent, as inspiring as Keith and the team over at ReConnect Rondo. There is direct partnership between our two organizations. We learn from one another, we speak back and forth, we share precedent-setting updates that we've both achieved in our own individual contexts, but I could not be more honored to be sharing a stage with you today. So just one more time for him, if you wouldn't mind. All right, my name is JT Flowers. I have the privilege of serving as the Director of Government Affairs at the Albina Vision Trust. I also chair the board of the Williams and Russell CDC, which is another restorative redevelopment effort here in Portland. And I have the honor of representing North and Northeast Portland on the TriMet Board of Directors. I have a couple thoughts today, some thoughts I wanted to share with y'all, and then some reflections on our work that I'll get into. Does that sound okay? Okay. At the heart of the human hunger to build, there have always been two fundamental questions. For whom and to what end? What do we prioritize and who do we afford access to it? What is mobility? What is community? And who is allowed to claim it? Foundational to the field of political science is the concept of path dependence. The notion that a limited set of decisions we are forced to choose from today are inextricably linked to decisions made decades prior. At the origin of a decision-making tree, an individual, or in our case, a city, is presented with a simple choice. Option A or option B. Invest in a community or invest in a highway. In 1956, the passage of the Federal Aid Highway Act set our country out on option B, the most ambitious and consequential capital construction project in American history. Through toil, trial, and error, interstate highway systems were fashioned into the tool of the times, the rope we would use to ostensibly tie our sprawling nation together. The urgency of our ambition was rooted not in a deep-seated concern for community, but rather a byproduct of fear. Public leaders responded to the threat of a Soviet nuclear war with a national defense program, a network of roadways to transport troops, machinery, and goods from one end of this country to the other. And of course, an evacuation outlet for citizens otherwise doomed to become collateral damage in a Cold War gone hot. Creation, at its worst, is an inherently violent process. Growth requires consumption, and the powerful determined who and what is consumed. In 1943, the city of Portland commissioned New Yorker Robert Moses, if y'all know the name, the famed, I would say infamous urban planner and destroyer of neighborhoods, to dictate the path forward for our ever-expanding town. His task was simple: to advise civic leaders here in Portland on how to best modernize our transportation infrastructure. His target was Lower Albina. Then home to 80% of Portland's black population, the Albina Robert Moses laid his eyes on was a bustling residential and commercial hub nestled against the banks of the Willamette River. To Mr. Moses and the local officials that offered him the modern-day equivalent of nearly $2 million to diagnose our city's ills, Lower Albina was in the way. Build a highway through it, he said. So they did. Public leaders have always had an outsized impact on what gets built, where it gets built, and who it gets built for. Here in Portland and across the United States of America, the concept of community itself was knowingly fed to the beast, sacrificed as the inevitable cost of a well-defended society. Our cities were built not around the movement, safety, and generational well-being of people, but around the movement of goods and vehicles, collateral damage from a bomb that never went off. The choice between option A and option B, the choice of how we would construct the next 100 years of our country's connective tissue was made in 1943. Path dependence tells us that upending the latter is not as simple as resolving ourselves to make a different decision today. It requires us to collectively commit to the process of undoing each and every subsequent decision that has stemmed from that original misstep 81 years ago. Sometimes moving forward requires us to walk backwards, to dedicate ourselves not only to undoing for undoing's sake, but to undoing as an act of healing, as an act of creation. Our ancestors understood that creation is only violent when it centers the privileged few over the marginalized many. Those of you gathered in this room today have fought to protect a fundamental truth, the notion that creation at its best is an inherently healing process. We stand here in the aftermath of 1943, celebrating the promise of what mobility can be, of what community can be. Mobility to us means agency. Mobility to us means ownership. Mobility to us means freedom. We are gathered here today because we understand that at the intersection of agency, ownership, and freedom exists power. And without power, none of us can truly be free. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. told us that power without love is reckless and abusive, that love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best, he said, is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. Power means walking as far backwards as it takes to clear a path for all of us to move forward. It means coupling the courage to dream with an unflinching willingness to fight our way through the muck. Together, we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to build the most infrastructurally, environmentally, and socially innovative city in the United States of America. That work is what I have the privilege of standing before you today to talk about. And if you're all right, we'll move into the presentation. Does that sound okay? Okay. The neighborhood that was destroyed here in the city of Portland was known as Harlem on the Willamette. This was a world-class neighborhood, home to jazz venues that people traveled from all over the country to frequent. We had everybody from the likes of Thelonious Monk to Louis Armstrong pass through this part of the city, not the part of the city we're standing in today. I'm used to standing in my neighborhood. Give me 2 seconds here. But there were grocery stores, there were educational institutions, pharmacists, cobblers, everything that you would imagine that comprises the fabric of a neighborhood existed in Lower Albina. And the migratory pattern of black folks to this area, this city, is not all that important for the purposes of our conversation today. To give you the Cliff Notes version for those of y'all that were maybe like me, born in the 90s, this right here is a byproduct of a group of people being forced into a particular area of the city, relegated to its borders and told that there is nowhere else that they'd be allowed to live. And what did those people do? Again, they built a world-class neighborhood. The neighborhood that you see in this far left-hand image here in 1948 was the neighborhood I just described. And the street grid that you see from this aerial image is actually the street grid that Portland is famous for, right? You have a bunch of small walkable blocks lined with single-family residential homes, all the way down to the Willamette waterfront. There are Black-owned homes lining the waterfront. Again, this area of the city is over 80% Black at this point in time. It is absolutely the mecca, the historic anchor point of Portland's Black community. It doesn't take long for this area to fundamentally change in nature. We fast forward 14 years to this central image in 1962, and we have a much different district on our hands, right? You see towards the top of this image, a big trench that gets dug through the middle of our community to form Interstate 5. You see a big box towards the center bottommost portion of that image, dropped on top of what were hundreds and hundreds of Black-owned homes to form what is now known as the Veterans Memorial Coliseum. Everything around that black box is cleared out to provide surface-level parking lots to service the Coliseum. We have Interstate Avenue dug along the waterfront, clearing out all those Black-owned homes that line the Willamette River. And then you have one remaining 12-block residential stronghold towards the northernmost portion of that yellow boundary that you see. Oftentimes, we talk about images like this like they are relegated to the archives of a historical society or the walls of a museum, as if these are figments of the past. But for many people in our community, this is living memory. One of our board members, Ms. Sharon Gary Smith, grew up right there in the middle of that 12-block stronghold on Dixon Street in a house that her family owned for over 50 years. Just 10 years after this image would be taken in that centralmost section of the slide here, that home, alongside everything else around it, would be torn down to build the Portland Public Schools Administrative Headquarters campus, a 10.5-acre parcel cleared out for the administrative function of a school district, right? So what we're left with in the present day, it says 2023, but we can ostensibly assume this is a present day image, is a district that looks like it had a bomb dropped on it, right? We effectively have 4 or 5 mega structures: Interstate 5, the Veterans Memorial Coliseum, the Moda Center where the Portland Trailblazers now play, the Portland Public School District and Interstate Avenue, and everything else in this district is effectively empty parking lots and open space. And that is quite the anomaly for an area this central, right? If we were talking about a 94-acre stretch this central in New York City, we'd be talking about 94 acres on the East River separating Manhattan and Brooklyn. That is how core this is to Portland's geography. We would expect certain things to be true about an area that's central. First off, we would expect it to be the most developed area of a city. We'd also expect it to be the most densely populated, and we probably expect one of the broadest arrays of private property ownership. We'd expect dozens, if not hundreds, of property owners to be clustered in an area this large. Here in Portland, we have the inverse of every single one of those metrics. This is the least developed area of our central city. As of a year ago, there were only 66 existing units of housing, all of which were clustered in a single historic apartment building in this entire 94-acre district. And on top of that, there are only 12 property owners, the bulk of whom are actually large public entities like the City of Portland, like the Oregon Department of Transportation, which of course manages the highway, and like the Portland Public School District. So what we are left with from a community-based perspective is an opportunity to reimagine not just what it means to reroute people in a piecemeal way, right? To build a development over here, a community center maybe another 10 blocks north, an education hub another 7 blocks south, but rather to think comprehensively about what it would look like for us to reimagine and construct a neighborhood, an entire zip code from the ground up. Our work, very similar to ReConnect Rondo, really started in earnest back in 2017. It came off the back of a long and drawn-out city planning process that a few folks decided they wanted to break away from. And what they realized in the midst of this city-led planning process was that we were starting the story of Lower Albina in the middle. We were talking about the future of this area of our central city as if nothing had ever existed here, right? They said, if we're going to be successful in building this area out and maximizing its potential across every metric imaginable, not just the economics of the district, but the social fabric of the district, the equity-based fabric of this district, we have to do so. We have to build it out in a manner that also heals the harm that we intentionally wrought upon this community. That group of people stood up what they thought at that point was an advocacy-based organization, the Albina Vision. There was no trust in our name at that time. The Albina Vision to basically frame the storytelling and narrative development around what should happen in this area of the city. Fast forward a few years later, and our founding board very quickly realized that advocacy alone was not going to get the job done here in Lower Albina. If we wanted to meaningfully shape this district into what it was capable of becoming, we were going to have to simultaneously occupy the role of advocate while shifting into the role of developer. We had to be the builders, the owners, and the managers of what got built in this area so that we could make sure that the way it was built and the aftermath, all the benefit of building it, flowed directly into the people who were displaced, who were harmed by the decimation of the district to begin with. So in 2020, we became operational, hiring Winter Johannes, our first executive director, the remarkable leader I have the privilege of working for on a day-to-day basis. She deserves a round of applause. And we set out on an ambitious effort to try to gauge what should happen in this area of the city. I should say that right before that happened, our founding board kicked off a series of visioning workshops. They pulled community members far and wide into rooms. They said, hey, if y'all could imagine a future in this district, is this an opportunity we would want to take advantage of? And folks walked away from those visioning sessions with varying reactions. Most people said the intention behind this is beautiful. The ambition behind this is inspiring, but this is not practical or feasible. Where the hell are y'all gonna come up with the money to do all this stuff? Where are you gonna muster the political will to get this done? Like, we don't have the power we need to execute a vision this large and this audacious. When we kickstarted our work in 2020, we understood the traditional paradigm that existed in development, right? This is a pretty standard fare way that we approach development. You buy a building or a parcel of land, you come up with a site plan, or if it's big enough, a master plan, and then at some point, maybe a few years down the road, you say, God damn it, we should probably engage community in some way, shape, or form. Why don't we host a series of 90-minute workshops to ask these folks what they want to see out of this development? We're going to let them carve out a 64th of this site plan, or maybe if they're lucky, a 16th, and tell us where you want us to site your playground for your little kids or your community garden, whatever we decide to build for you. And then you get to show up on ribbon cutting day, smile big for the cameras, and say that you built something in alignment with the needs of community. In reality, over the course of 3-4 years, you've engaged community for a total of 3 to 4 hours, right? That paradigm was not going to work for us here in Lower Albina. So before we owned a single parcel of land, before we owned a building, before we had a penny in the bank, we worked with Metro, actually our regional government here, thanks to the leadership of President Peterson here and her fellow counselors. They seeded us with a $200,000 grant, a planning grant that typically would be administered by Metro. And they said, in partnership with Albina Vision Trust, we will actually allow y'all to step into the driver's seat of shaping and crafting this planning process because you guys are the ones who know your community best. Who are we to tell you how to run a community engagement and land use planning process with your own community? That was a remarkable feat of leadership from Metro, and it was something that allowed us to lay the groundwork for what is now recognized as the Albina Vision. So again, before we owned a single building, we kicked off a 3-year-long community engagement and technical land use planning process known as the Community Investment Plan, the CIP, and we engaged thousands of people with historic roots in this area of the city. The youngest person engaged was 4 years old. The oldest person engaged was 94 years old. And we asked them a simple set of questions. It's actually quite similar to what Keith was just up here talking about. If you had a paintbrush and a 94-acre blank canvas, what would you paint here in the heart of your central city? And really importantly, we asked people not to answer that question from a survivalistic framework. So often, folks in our communities are forced to think about their futures in terms of meeting basic needs, right? What does it look like for us to have a roof over our heads, food on the table, and lights that don't get shut off at the end of the month? We wanted folks to break out of that paradigm and think intentionally, aspirationally about their future, their children's futures, their grandchildren's futures after them in the heart of Portland's urban core. The answers to those questions ended up effectively setting the bedrock, the cornerstone of what is now publicly recognized as the Albina Vision. So while folks think that we're a group of real smart people who sit around in rooms and carve up this area of the city, in reality, the reason we're successful is because we are simply the stewards of a community-created vision for what's possible in this area of the city. And what is possible is tremendous. In the past 3.5, 4 years alone, this has gone from what was effectively a PowerPoint presentation and a few poster boards to what is now publicly recognized as the largest community-led development in the entire United States of America. Thank you. That designation cuts across a few different markers, right? We're the largest in terms of project area at 94 acres. That makes us one of the largest contiguous central city developments in the entire country, community-led or not. We are one of the furthest along. Actually, just 5 weeks ago, we celebrated the grand opening of our inaugural 94-unit family-oriented affordable housing development, Albina 1, moving the first families back into this area of the city in over 4 decades. And we are also the largest in terms of funding. We've brought over $850 million in direct investment to this district over the course of the past 4 years. We don't have too much time here, so I want to talk to you about a couple of the core parts of our work. Oftentimes, if you ask folks what AVT does, Albina Vision Trust, for those who are new to Portland, they'll say, oh, AVT, those are those great folks who build affordable housing for black folks to move them back into this area of the city they got pushed out of. And while in some senses that is partially true, right, affordable housing is a big part of what we do, it is incredibly reductive of the scope of work that we have on our hands. You look at these 3 images, it was so much more than housing that was destroyed in this area of the city. And again, the destruction mirrors the same type of destruction you heard Keith talk about in Rondo. It was businesses that were destroyed. It was the cultural fabric that connects neighbors to one another, that familiarity that creates intimacy in the context of an urban city that was destroyed. We have to reconstruct all of that from the ground up. And with that, it's really important for me to very explicitly say our goal is not to recreate the neighborhood that existed here in 1948. Right? That is simply not feasible. Our city exists in a modern context. We face modern challenges. We know that we face an unprecedented shortage in access to housing, particularly affordable housing. We need to build, and we need to build at density. Our challenge to ourselves as an organization is to not allow those obstacles to become exactly that, obstacles, but rather to take those limitations and use them as opportunities for innovations. Our goal here is to build a world-class, technologically, socially, and environmentally innovative neighborhood that is rooted in the generational prosperity of working-class people. And this vision is a large one, right? I mentioned Albina 1, the building that we just opened up. Those are our first 94 families to move back into the district. But we're talking about resituating well over 2,500 to 3,000 people in this area of the city in the next 6 to 10 years alone. That is just through the redevelopment of the Portland Public Schools site, which I'll talk about in 2 seconds here. And over the course of 15, 20 years, we're talking closer to 6,000 people who will be moving back into this area of the city. So many people that the city of Portland has said they very well may need to create a new zip code to accommodate for all the new families who will be repopulating this area. So we have the privilege of really imagining a zip code from scratch. If we could design the most aspirational version of what's possible here, how would it look and who would it benefit, right? So I want to really briefly rattle through a couple of our core projects, and then I'm going to get off this mic and stop rambling at y'all, if that sounds okay. So the cornerstone of our work is really the redevelopment of the Portland Public Schools administrative headquarters site. That was that 12-block residential stronghold that survived the initial onslaught that I mentioned in that central image that was replaced by that big old 10.5-acre building. Our first seminal win as an organization was very niche. It was a very wonkish policy win, Back in 2021, we secured right of first offer, right of first refusal on that 10.5-acre parcel, thanks to a partnership with Multnomah County, which actually had right of first refusal and decided to pass it off to us. And at the time, that felt historic to us. It was historic in nature. But one thing we very quickly learned about right of first refusal, for anybody who's not familiar with it, it's just a fancy real estate term for first dibs. It did not mean that the school district had to sell us their building, right? It didn't even mean they had to think about moving somewhere else. It just meant that if they ever did, we'd be first in line to make or match an offer, right? So we had to double back in February of 2024 and secure an additional resolution from the Portland Public School Board. What that resolution did is it solidified a timeline for the school district to identify a new headquarters site to move to. And it also explicitly stated that once they did, they would sell this parcel to the Albina Vision Trust. That's fantastic. We've embarked on a 1.5-year-long work plan. We've been identifying parcels together. And the way this deal will work is AVT will be responsible for buying the school district 2 new buildings. One, to situate their administrative headquarters function, and the second, to situate operations and maintenance activities that they also have anchored at this parcel at present. Once we do that, we'll trade them for this 10.5-acre parcel. The great news that I have to report to you today is we expect to be able to tie this parcel up under a purchase and sale agreement by the end of this calendar year. Of course, there'll be a little bit of time before we actually get our hands on a parcel. We actually have probably another 5-6 months before we close on a parcel. Then we'll have another 12 to 18 months of a leaseback process, so they have time to pack up their things and decide where they're moving to next. But around mid-2027, we get to get demo underway, and around 2028, we get to start building. And what we'll be building here will be really remarkable in nature. We will be building well over 1,000 units of housing on this parcel, all types of housing, everything from affordable rentals to home ownership opportunities will be present on this parcel. We will also have to build parks, community gardens. We'll have to redesign the street grid through this area of the city, relay sidewalks which don't exist because, again, 12 city blocks were melded into one building. We'll have to reimagine the way we think about the way this neighborhood connects to transit. We also have a really once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reimagine the energy infrastructure of this district. And oftentimes when we have those conversations, we do it on a building-by-building basis, right? This is a LEED Platinum certified building. This is an Earth Advantage Plus certified building. Here we have the opportunity to have that conversation on a 10.5-acre footprint, which gives us larger, more efficient solutions to shop from, right? We can think about things like district-wide microgrids. We can think about geothermal heat pump systems that would allow us to create one of the largest climate-positive developments in the entire United States of America, right here smack dab in the middle of our city. And most importantly, a development that would be entirely community-driven, community-built, and community-owned. So that is the Portland Public Schools site. I don't have a slide showing you guys the highway, but I'll go back to this. This is probably the best image. Forgive me here. I'm a little under-resourced on the images today. I feel bad. Keith had all these fantastic images. I said, God damn, I got to go back and do some work. So if you look at the big trench that was dug through the middle of the community, of course, that is Interstate 5. Back in, what was this? This was summer of 2023. We got a visit from then Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg. He came to Portland for a number of reasons, but here in Portland, he went on 2 tours. He went and toured 82nd Avenue to talk about bus rapid transit, which I'm very proud to say as a TriMet board member is moving forward. And just for the record, we support full BAT in this household. And then he came down to tour our project area at AVT. And after that tour, he said that, you know, in his tenure as Transportation Secretary, he's been to 603 cities and towns all over this country. He's been to all 50 states. Nowhere has he seen a project that's not only as audacious as this one, but as feasible as well. And we said, we get it, brother. You're running for president 2028. You're mighty charming. We appreciate you. You might even have our vote. But we didn't expect this to result in anything material for our district. Fast forward 6 months, March of 2024, we were notified that our work had been awarded the largest federal Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods grant in the entire country, $488.5 million to 2 separate projects. But before y'all clap, we all know there was a transition in administration at the federal level, which has significantly complicated some of those efforts, those 2 efforts being the Broadway Main Street project being pioneered by PBOT, and of course the I-5 Rose Quarter Improvement Project, which would build an 8-acre buildable highway cover right through the middle of Lower Albina, reconstituting the normalcy of our street grid and restoring the residential feel of what is now one of the most congested and dangerous areas for pedestrians and vehicles in the entire state of Oregon. But with the passage of the Big Beautiful Bill, much of that funding was rescinded. There's a lot of gray area here on exactly what's happening. We've had the ability to draw down well over $70 million to those 2 separate grants over the course of the past few months, though the money is supposed to be gone. So whatever that means, I'm gonna let y'all decide. But I'd like to remind us of a really important lesson we learned from light rail, right? And when we think about light rail funding and the way that that funding came into being here in Portland, we secured it right in the late 70s. Reagan steps into office, much of that funding is rescinded. We say, oh Lord, light rail's dead. Fast forward, 6, 7 years, much of that funding is restored, and now Portland is internationally renowned for its light rail system. I think we'd expect something similar to happen here at the federal level. Once that federal pendulum swings back, the challenge for us will be keeping the state and the city at the table long enough to keep these projects moving on time and on budget in the meantime. So that is the highway cover. It's a central part of restoring the feel of the neighborhood. Another one of our core principles as an organization is reconnection to the Willamette River, right? So much of the feel of a central city is rooted in access to the things that make a city feel beautiful, right? For communities pushed to the margins of American society, we know over the course of the past 30, 40 years, we've been pushed further and further and further away from those beautiful things and closer towards the desolate fringes of whatever locality we call home. That is not an acceptable outcome for us. So we work with everybody from Metro to the city of Portland to Union Pacific Railroad, which has train tracks cutting off this area of the city from the river to reimagine what could be the largest waterfront park on the east side of the Willamette River, a lot that is currently serving as a massive, almost 4-acre parking lot on the waterfront servicing both of those stadiums. And when we zoom all the way out, because I got 1 minute here, and I'm not trying to get beat up, so let me make sure I'm on time here. To zoom all the way out and talk about our work, what we have the opportunity to do here in Lower Albina is not just build a neighborhood, it's to completely redefine a 21st century paradigm of urban development, one that for the first time takes community out of the passenger seat of the city building process and situates community instead in the driver's seat of dictating their own future. That is core to everything that we do, core to the way we imagine the future, and core to the way we imagine building out 21st century American cities. There's one win I want to mention. I should have ended right there. That would have been a great place to end. But there's something very, very important that I want to say. The work that ReConnect Rondo has been doing has been incredibly pioneering on a policy front, and we have been able to feed off of that energy and secure landmark policy wins of our own right here in Lower Albina. One came very quietly this past legislative session, which wrapped up to not much fanfare, if you know anything about transportation, in June of this year, 2025. This bill was called SB 1182, and what it did was it granted the Albina Vision Trust right of first refusal on all 8 acres of this eventual highway cover, which means that for the first time in our nation's history, if this highway cover is fully built out, and we expect it to be, community will be in the driver's seat of buying up that land and building everything that gets developed on top of it. It's a historic win for us, a historic win for our country, and I think a signal of hope for what's possible when we band together, when we think of this work not as the work of any one individual community, but as our collective work as a city, as a state, and as a country, and again, a signal of what's possible when the brilliant minds gathered in rooms like this one put all of their collective wisdom towards the goal of bringing people closer together. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you.
Thank you so much, JT. Thank you, Keith. That was incredible. And I realize that was a bit of a mic drop ending from 2 incredible keynote speakers. I also have been around long enough to know that no one ever wants to follow JT on the stage. So I'm sorry, but you get me for just a couple more minutes. I promise, so bear with me. But I am so thankful that we had both Keith and JT here today. Really remarkable efforts, things happening on the ground, elements that absolutely ignite the imagination. And while learning more about their work and in talking with so many colleagues as we prepared to host this year's Mpact, I have been struck by the use of the term community, and I wanted to just spend a little bit of time reflecting on what that means. Community as a source of health and well-being, community as an indicator of collective well-being. Again and again, we talk about the need to come together as community. In our day-to-day lives, there are many things that divide us. We might face barriers from physical infrastructure. We might have relationships that are strained due to displacement and impacts of historic or current inequities. And with social media, we can experience loneliness or social isolation. And the broader national issues can make us feel so powerless. You know, I actually considered coming today as an inflatable frog, but thought it might be an issue with the mic, I don't know. But the antidote is to rebuild, to reconnect, gather in, find comfort in, and strengthen our communities. Dr. Vivek Murthy, the 19th and 21st Surgeon General of the United States, in his last days in office in January, wrote a parting prescription for America that discusses this concept. He defines the 3 core pillars of community as relationship, service, and purpose. And those pillars are reflected in what we've heard today from Keith and JT. They also apply to Mpact and why we're all here celebrating 30 years of this movement together. We have a multitude of communities that we identify with, but we are also in community with each other right now. And so these pillars, first, relationships, these are the connections that we build with other people, the connections that create spaces where we feel safe, where we feel seen, and we can be ourselves. Mpact is a venue and a tool that allows us to meet people with shared values and experience within this work and build our social infrastructure. Dr. Beverly Scott reminded us of how powerful these relationships are and expanding her network just yesterday. Metro Council President Peterson talked about that this morning as well. Second is service. These are the actions that we take to benefit others. From giving our time or performing acts of kindness, large and small, service reminds us that we all have value to bring and offer the world. Maybe you participated in the Mpact Give Back event at the Blanchet House on Saturday, or today you could just check in on a colleague, meet someone new, listen and learn about a person's story. And the third is purpose. Purpose is why we do what we do. With a strong sense of purpose, our commitment to each other grows and in turn strengthens community. The Albina Vision Trust is incredibly clear on their purpose and in turn brings community in to drive and determine the future of a rooted albina. ReConnect Rondo and Albina Vision give us examples of what reconnecting and creating community is all about. And here at PBOT, we're continuing to rethink how we can better use our streets with intention and purpose. Streets are our city's largest public space. We're thinking about how we can enhance community cohesion and connection with and in our streets. How we can rethink downtown as a neighborhood that offers gathering and recreational opportunities, connections to nature, culture, and activated public squares. So in closing, I hope that you found some inspiration in what Keith and JT have shared. We've heard several calls to action to find courage in our leadership, to be relentless in our work, to empower, to think big like JT, to clap together like they do in ReConnect Rondo. So let's dig into this moment, make some magic happen, strengthen our Mpact community, and in turn, our own communities. A very quick reminder for tonight, save some energy. It's the Pecha Kucha. I think if you know, you know. If you're a first timer, it's an event you won't want to miss. It's presented by the Mpact Innovators, PK Slam, 8 p.m., Revolution Hall. It is the 30th anniversary, so I think the plan is to party like it's 1995. There's a theme. There might be a surprise at intermission with a joint dance, a Macarena. So practice your moves. And I do also think that for tonight we should call it Railvolution Hall. Oh. Anyway, have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your sessions. Thank you so much.